It wasn't just another congressional hearing, it was a political showdown. What was supposed to be a fact-finding inquiry quickly turned into a clash of wit, credibility, and raw tension. At the center stood Representative Jasmine Crockett, armed with sharp questions and an unflinching style, dismantling witnesses tied to Donald Trump's orbit. What followed was part courtroom drama, part reality TV takedown, exposing contradictions, unraveling half-truths, and leaving the witnesses scrambling to defend themselves. The atmosphere inside the hearing room was anything but calm, as the air buzzed with tension while lawmakers clashed over the credibility of witnesses in the impeachment inquiry. At the center stood Representative Jasmine Crockett, a sharp and fiery Democrat known for her no-nonsense questioning, facing MAGA-aligned witnesses who came prepared to push a narrative she was equally ready to dismantle. From the outset, her approach was direct, precise, and unwavering, reminding everyone that testifying before Congress was not political theater but a solemn duty under oath. Yet, across the table sat witnesses seemingly more interested in currying political favor than telling the truth. What unfolded was no routine hearing but a dramatic showdown between fact and fiction, accountability and evasion. Crockett wasted no time in exposing the vulnerabilities of one witness, beginning with a pointed question. "Do you know who Elections LLC is?" The witness stumbled, initially mischaracterizing it as a person before conceding it was a legal entity, one tied directly to his attorney. Crockett then revealed documents showing that Elections LLC had been paid $10,000 earlier in the year by Donald Trump's Save America PAC, meaning the witness's legal representation was financially connected to Trump's political operation. The implication was unmistakable. This was not simply about legal counsel but about divided loyalties, raising the question of whether impartiality was possible when one's defense was tied to the very figure at the heart of the controversy, a question Crockett ensured lingered in the minds of all present. After exposing the Trump-connected legal ties, Representative Jasmine Crockett shifted gears with biting wit, comparing the hearing to an episode of The Apprentice, the reality show once hosted by Donald Trump. With irony laced through her words, she suggested that instead of seeking truth, some witnesses, and even a few colleagues, seemed to be competing for Trump's approval, auditioning to be his next political sidekick. The remark landed sharply, drawing tension across the room, but Crockett pressed on, reminding everyone that this was not a television audition or campaign stunt, but a congressional hearing under oath with real consequences. By framing the proceedings as political theater, she stripped the credibility from the showmanship before her, exposing the spectacle for what it was, a staged performance for an audience of one, Donald Trump. She then turned her focus to a deeper flaw in one witness's testimony, his sweeping tendency to dismiss nearly everyone else as dishonest. Piece by piece, she listed his accusations. The Wall Street Journal, Cassidy Hutchinson, the FBI, former business associates Rob Walker and James Gilliar, Hunter Biden, Jim Biden, all liars, according to him. And that very day, he had even branded Congressman Dan Goldman a liar. The pattern was undeniable. In his world, virtually everyone else was untruthful, except himself. Crockett drove the point home with sharp precision. If one person insists that everyone around them is lying, what does that reveal about their own credibility? The irony was clear. Rather than presenting himself as a beacon of truth, the witness appeared trapped in a bubble of self-delusion, where only his narrative could be trusted. Under Crockett's questioning, his testimony began to unravel before the committee's eyes. Representative Jasmine Crockett widened her lens, arguing that if credibility truly mattered, then so did the company one kept. Republicans on the panel had tried to undermine Democrats by pointing to questionable figures they had associated with, but Crockett swiftly turned that argument back on them. She reminded the committee that the majority's case leaned heavily on testimony from individuals already convicted of crimes, including one person currently serving time in federal prison. Then she drew the line straight to Donald Trump himself, pointing out that his inner circle included figures convicted of fraud, defamation, sexual assault, and financial misconduct. And beyond those convictions lay another irony. Trump, the self-styled billionaire who built his brand on wealth and power, couldn't even seem to pay his own legal bills. When Crockett pressed witness Lev Parnas on whether Trump had associates guilty of crimes, his answer was blunt. Yes. Lots of them. Me included. It was a devastating moment, one that exposed not only the hypocrisy of the GOP's attacks, but also the shaky foundation of their case. If credibility was the standard, Trump's orbit was nothing more than a house of cards. Having dismantled the credibility of the witnesses and their associations, Crockett then turned to the shadowy figure at the center of the controversy, Rudy Giuliani. She reminded the committee that the impeachment spectacle had been sparked by a single document, the now infamous 1023. But that document, she stressed, had long since been debunked. Even Lev Parnas, one of the Republicans' own witnesses, confirmed its lack of credibility before the inquiry ever began. And yet, the entire case Republicans clung to traced back to Giuliani, Trump's personal lawyer turned political operative, who had chased shadows in Ukraine and spun conspiracy theories into supposed evidence. The irony was inescapable. While Republicans demanded endless testimony from Hunter Biden, who had already spent 6 hours behind closed doors answering every question, they showed no interest in calling Giuliani to testify. Crockett's point was simple but powerful. If their case rested on Giuliani's claims, then the only path to truth was to hear from Giuliani himself. And yet, Republicans seemed determined to avoid that possibility, leaving their impeachment effort hanging on a foundation as flimsy as the witness credibility Crockett had already unraveled. Representative Jasmine Crockett didn't just name Rudy Giuliani as the source of the chaos. She spotlighted Republicans' refusal to confront him directly. She reminded the committee that Democrats had pushed to subpoena Giuliani, arguing that if he had been the architect of the Ukraine operation, personally orchestrating the flow of misinformation, then his testimony was indispensable. Giuliani had traveled, schemed, and spun narratives that Republicans eagerly amplified. Who better to clarify what really happened than the man himself? Yet when the moment came to hold Giuliani accountable, the door slammed shut. Republicans blocked efforts to bring him in, just as they resisted subpoenas for his phone records and other evidence. They wanted his accusations, but not his accountability. Lev Parnas reinforced the point, openly welcoming the idea of Giuliani testifying under oath and even saying he wished Giuliani was sitting beside him at the witness table so the truth could be laid bare. The contrast was glaring. Democrats and even some witnesses wanted transparency, while Republicans seemed to fear what Giuliani might reveal under questioning. Crockett let that contradiction linger, a reminder that selective fact-finding was no fact-finding at all. If one moment crystallized the evasiveness of the witnesses, it was the question of how one of them ended up at a presidential debate. In a private deposition, he had been asked directly, "Who got you into the debate?" His answer was slippery, "I do not recall." That might have passed quietly behind closed doors, but in the public spotlight of the hearing, Representative Robert Garcia pressed him again. The exchange bordered on theatrical. Garcia noted that transcripts showed the witness explicitly claimed he couldn't remember how he gained entry, yet photos and seating charts made it clear he had been placed among Trump officials, a position far from random. Cornered, the witness dodged with semantics, quibbling over phrasing, but the committee wasn't convinced. The truth was plain. He had been Trump's guest, and he had attempted to obscure that fact under oath. The contradiction didn't just cast doubt on a single detail, it underscored the broader pattern Crockett and her colleagues had revealed. Witnesses unwilling to give straight answers whenever the truth threatened to expose inconvenient ties. The credibility cracks widened further when the witness was pressed about yet another appearance, a Trump press conference held just before the presidential debate. Representative Robert Garcia challenged him directly. If he truly wasn't a political actor, why was he showing up at events staged by the Trump campaign? The witness dodged again, claiming he couldn't qualify whether it was Trump's event or that his lawyers had simply coordinated things. But the facts told a different story. Photos showed him standing at the press conference, speaking to national media, and flanked by Trump operatives. Garcia pointed out the obvious. Trump strategist Jason Miller had arranged his presence. Cornered, the witness spiraled into contradictions, insisting he wasn't political while speaking at a campaign event, insisting he couldn't recall details yet conveniently remembering moments that suited his narrative. The exchange slipped into the absurd when, after repeated questions about who invited him, he finally blurted out that he flew on a plane, drawing quiet chuckles from those watching. By the end, the picture was unmistakable. This was not the testimony of a reliable truth-teller, but of someone so deeply entangled in Trump's orbit that he could neither, or would neither, be honest about how he got there. By the close of the hearing, the story was no longer about Hunter Biden or alleged wrongdoing by President Biden. It was about the witnesses themselves and their collapsing credibility. Representatives Jasmine Crockett and Robert Garcia had systematically exposed evasions, contradictions, and half-truths. From the shady financial ties of the witnesses' attorneys, to the evasive "I don't recall" answers about a presidential debate and press conference, their testimony crumbled under scrutiny. Even Republican members were left with little to show. After hours of questioning, no evidence had surfaced linking President Biden to corrupt business dealings. What remained was a spectacle, a hearing long on theatrics but short on substance. The takeaway was clear. If the foundation of an impeachment inquiry rests on unreliable witnesses with tangled connections and selective memories, the inquiry itself collapses. Crockett's cutting precision and Garcia's persistence had revealed the simple truth. The case wasn't built on facts at all, but on political theater. And in that theater, the star witnesses proved themselves unfit for the role of truth-tellers.